The Waves of Tech is the down-to-earth tech podcast for you, your family, and your friends. We remove all the complicated, drawn-out explanations of technology and simply talk about how technology is influencing every element of our lives, from social media and the cloud to tweeting and mobile communication. We talk tech in a different way. So plug in your devices and listen as we get ready to ride the waves of tech.
On episode 438 of The Waves of Tech, we talk branding and marketing with Stephen A. Hart of Trailblazers.fm and Brand U Academy. Find recent episodes of the podcast and connect with us on social media by heading over to thewavesoftech.com. Well, Steve, I am back from Palm Springs, and you are back from a little weekend RV trip. How you doing tonight, buddy?
I'm doing good. I'm sure your trip was probably a little better than mine. I mean, you got to do some cool things and talk to some cool people. But, hey, it's always great to be back on a Monday and do the Waves of Tech. And I'm always excited when we have a guest on the show, and this week is no different.
Absolutely. We have the great Stephen A. Hart joining us. Stephen, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, buddy?
Thank you for having me, brother.
Absolutely. Well, we have been friends for a couple years. We met at Podcast Movement 2016 down in Anaheim.
Yes.
We have been on our International Podcast Day event 2 years running, and it's great to have you. How you doing?
Always one of my fun times of the year to jump on International Podcast Day with you guys. And I'm good. I was just sharing, I'm enjoying the last days of cold here in Maryland, being very sarcastic about Jamaican and me.
That's true. We were just railing a little bit that you had some slicing wind on your way to lunch, and I was in beautiful Palm Springs and Bakersfield right now, where it's 70 and 80 degrees. So a little bit of jealousy, and but sometimes, hey, I'd want some of that cold and a little bit of that snow and rain too. So Stephen, introduce yourself to our listeners, to our friends of the podcast. I listen to your podcast. I think it's great. We've talked about your branding academy. So just introduce yourself, and then we can get this show on the road.
If you haven't heard my accent, it'll come and go. I'm originally from Jamaica, and I am a brand alignment strategist. And what that means is that I help entrepreneurs and leaders to develop an amazing personal brand that is authentic, that is impactful, and most importantly, is profitable. I'm also a podcaster, as you shared, and I host the Trailblazers.fm podcast, which really explores the stories of today's successful Black professionals, entrepreneurs, professionals, and leaders. And I've been doing that now for a little bit over 3 years and having a great time with that as well.
Yeah, so you're up to 164 episodes on your podcast, and
yes.
Great titles, from turning $5 into $10 million business, and some recent episodes where you talked about developing an entrepreneurial mindset, and also a great leader in the space that's helping thousands of homeless women veterans.
Yes.
And so your podcast just well-rounded. You get so many different interesting perspectives on what's going on, and I just love that it's been centered around exploring the successful Black entrepreneurs and professionals out there.
Yeah, that was just something inspired by having 2 young kids, and at the time, my daughter was like 5, and I just wanted her to see examples of professions and people that she could aspire to be more like, instead of what the media often just shares with you, success stories of athletes and musicians. And I thought, I live in this progressive area of Maryland where there's so many people doing some exciting things. And I thought, why don't we showcase their stories and, provide that as representation for other people? And it's just been an amazing journey ever since, getting to meet some really, really amazing people around the country.
Yeah, that's led to a couple speaking gigs. It's led to some great connections for you. And of course, you branched off and have your Brand U Academy. And if you're a busy entrepreneur, if you're a busy leader and you want to build your personal brand, man, you have an academy right there. Open enrollment starting this month. And tell us a little bit about what the Academy is and what people can benefit from that.
It's interesting you share that in that way, because the idea for the Academy really stemmed from the podcast. On a weekly basis, I have probably 5, 6, 7 people reaching out to me, either by way of events I'm attending, or more often than not through DMs and emails saying, hey, I'd love to be on your podcast. And more often than not, what happens, Dave, is that I come across people who have an amazing story to share, and then I Google them and nothing comes up, or what comes up leaves me indifferent. And it happens too often where someone did not really give thought to making sure that their website, making sure that their digital presence, right, their social media presence really stood out from the crowd. And I would oftentimes just file that, right, in my Gmail and in one of the folders, and then never come back to it. And the light bulb moment kind of happened when I realized, like, hey, you know what? I've been able to build my personal brand over the last, 5 years to what it is today. And I'm seeing so much success by way of it. And by nature, I'm a brand and marketing guy. I could take what I'm doing for businesses and apply that to the personal. And that's essentially what gave life to Brand You Academy, which is an online course, a 6-week online course geared at that, just helping you to really look at the elements that you need to give life to be able to build an amazing personal brand and stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive what you've built. And Steve, I want to get you in on this conversation, of course, and just looking at 2019 and it's always been corporate brands. That's always sort of been the thing, or podcast brands or agency brands, whatever it is. And we are definitely getting into the more personal branding, personal marketing side of it, where I know a lot of podcasters are also trying to figure that out. As you said, individuals that are trying to either do their public speaking gigs, a consulting firm, it's usually just a solo act. Steve, you do this as well with your IT company. And so having that personal brand and that personal touch, in which like an academy like Steven offers, can definitely help you sort of pave that way into success and profitability in the future.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Dave. I have gone through, over the many years of my life and my careers, various forms of, let's call it identification or branding. And some of them have been good. Some of them have not been so good. And I think for a lot of us, we think, oh, I got this great idea to rebrand to blah, 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 blah. And we do it because, unfortunately, it sounds good at the time. It's something new. It's something refreshing, but it might not have been the right choice to make. And I think you can, in that respect, kind of overdo it. And then the other thing I think that is also important is that I think a lot of people have in their minds this notion that, primarily within branding, that branding is, it's a logo, it's a business card, and that kind of stuff. But that is so far from the truth that is truly not branding.
I love that you said that, Steve. I love that you said that, because that is often one of the places I start off most of our conversations, right? What's the perception that, what do you think about? What comes to mind when the topic of branding comes up? And by default, most people go right to a logo, right? And I often start off most of my conversations around branding from a place that has nothing to do with design, right? This works in the corporate setting, and it also works with the personal brand, because everything that I apply within the course or as a service is exactly what I'm doing for a multi-million-dollar company on a day-to-day basis. As I work for a software company by day. And I think you always have to understand, first and foremost, who you are serving, right? And getting clear on, that audience piece, right? Most people do not know who they're serving. You ask somebody, who it is that you're trying to target, right? And they say everyone can benefit from my product. But you can't try to jump up and down, especially if you don't have a lot of resources, right? In the beginning. You can't be jumping up and down in an ocean trying to make an impact, right? We look at companies like Facebook, how many people do you think Facebook probably serves today, right? But they didn't start there. They actually started off in Harvard, in an elite fraternity, right? And focused in on a very, very, very specific group of people and got really crystal clear on who they were serving. And so they jumped up and down in that puddle until things began to expand out from there. And their resources were able to spread more, and then they grow from there, right? But the first place you have to start is getting crystal clear on who you're serving, understanding what you're serving them, what need you're fulfilling, right? What solution you're providing your product, and then building out a communication framework from there, right? I think everyone jumps to, okay, a logo, and then the next thing is like, we need a website, right? And the website has to look pretty, but they don't give thought to, hey, what is the copy? What is the message that we are sharing with someone? Is it simple? Is it relevant? Is it repeatable? Right? Is it going to confuse? One of my mentors is Don Miller of the Story Brand podcast. And Don always says, hey, if you confuse, you lose. Right? And that to me is like a fundamental piece of building a brand, getting clear on who you're serving, getting clear on your message. When you understand those pieces, Then we start to talk about brand elements and the design elements, and we get into logo and we build out from there, right? But got a little excited there.
No, we appreciate those insights. And Steven, you guys are both right. It always comes down to color, scheme, standing out from your competitors, and whether that's at a global, vision, or even like regionally within your own city, whether competing against a rival coffee shop in town, or eatery, or restaurant, or other, say, engineering consulting firm. It's about, like you said, has nothing to do with the design. It's about finding that audience, serving them, finding that need to fix that, having a solution to fix that need that's in the community, and then starting essentially from that foundation in building upwards.
And brand elements are important, right? When we talk about brand elements, we talk about things like for a personal brand, especially thinking of things like your color. I often tell people to look at, defining a color palette, defining a font pairing before moving into a logo. And the importance of color really in that wheel is big, right? We're podcasters, people who have a global footprint, like a podcast or like a blog, or, video people, right? Color is important because we're speaking to a global audience. And what a lot of people don't realize is people make a subconscious judgment, usually within like 90 seconds based on the color alone, right? And and color has different meanings in different regions and different religions and different cultures. So you have to be very mindful of some of those brand elements that you choose for your brand to represent you. Likewise with fonts and so on. So those things are very important, and you speak to them, but you have to make sure the fundamentals are there before you get into those more fuzzy areas, right? Of what feels warm and fuzzy when we talk about branding.
Dave, I don't want to spin you off into an area you don't want to go to, but while we're on this message that we're talking about right now, an example I think that you and I have lived through is when it came to branding of International Podcast Day over the last 5 or 6 years. And the reason I mention it is because we never considered something being international that then you have to deal with language barriers, interpretations of certain things, and the complexity of the branding of International Podcast Day was so much more different than me perhaps branding a local company where I live.
We went from a little 6-hour USA only focused celebration of podcast and podcasting to a global audience essentially over a 24-hour period. We were listening to the community. It was like a demographic in a place that we needed to serve, and they spoke loudly, and then we adjusted there. But you're right, exactly. When it comes to the likes of colors having different meanings in other parts of the world, whether based on where you live, your religion, your upbringing, whatever it may be, the same impact goes for what we did. And, sometimes you do get thrust into that branding element that you just weren't comfortable with, and you have to rely on experts to kind of focus on that. And fortunately, as we've experienced as podcasters, both on this show and for our International Podcast Day event, there is some forgiveness that goes along. But I think you're exactly right, Stephen, when you said if you confuse, you lose. And I know to some degree, a lot of us have been through that. We have suffered the consequences of confusing audiences, and you lose them. And that's not something that makes you feel good, but it does empower you to try and make better decisions in the future when it comes to branding.
As you say that, I think about, because I work for a software company that's global. We have a presence in China, Singapore, and Japan. And a couple years back, I hired a localization firm to translate or an updated website that we did in the US for China and for Japan. And I went ahead, hired a firm, really had all the boxes checked, right? And internally, our senior management was like, let's go ahead, move on it. And I spent probably about 12 grand doing a site for Japan. And I got done, and they looked at the site and they said, this is garbage. And this is internally. My internal team in Japan absolutely did not like the translation. And it was difficult to get through that process and try to understand exactly what went wrong. Who was wrong in this situation, right? Was it internally? Did they not like the language translation? Was it a preference issue? Or did this localization firm completely get it wrong on their end with their team? And it took a while to understand that in a country like Japan, there are preference issues with the style of how things are translated. And it took me going to another of our clients who also had a presence in Japan, looked at the same language and was completely fine with it. For me to realize, like, you know what? There are nuances that you have to pay attention to. In addition to the things that we're talking about with like fonts and colors and so on, the language and the way in which it's interpreted can also have, you know, an impact as well on some of what you're doing. So have to be mindful on all sides of it to be sure that, you know, everyone buys in.
Yeah, really good points. I mean, thinking very small term, you know, or very local and regional, like a lot of us do, in trying to broadcast not only your thoughts and your abilities into looking at more a global perspective is really difficult. And like you said, the audience that's in Japan is very different from an audience, say, in the country of Turkey or the United Kingdom or here in the United States, and let alone not only the United States, but regions of the United States, whether you're looking West Coast, East Coast, right, you know, the Midwest. It's a very different conversation that people have just based within small little pockets of whatever country you may be living in.
That's right.
So let's talk about some of the technology needs in 2019 and beyond, Stephen, when it comes to effectively branding and marketing. I know you have a bunch of tools in your toolkit that can help our listeners here that are either thinking about starting their own business, that are wanting to get into branding. So what sort of effective tools are out there that they can utilize?
There's some great tools out there. As we're talking about color, right? There are some great websites that I often lean to when we're talking about defining a color palette for your brand. One of the websites that I often go to is a website. The domain is brandcolors.net, brandcolors.net. And brandcolors.net is great because it actually is a database of color palettes of some of the larger companies that are out there. So, you know, some people will say, Stephen, you know, I'm not really good at putting these colors together, or I'm not good at finding inspiration and kind of having an idea of the direction I want to go. I would tell you to maybe look on brandcolors.net and look at some of the palettes that are out there and derive some inspiration from those, right? There are other websites like Coolors, Coolors. Can't remember if it's coolors.com, but if you source Coolors, it'll come up for you. And that's a great website as well with colors where you can input what's called a hex code, a hexadecimal code, a 6-digit number that you should document for each color that you select. So instead of just saying blue, right, there's a particular shade of blue that you like, and it has a 6-digit code that you can document, and you can go to that code, and no matter where you are, whether you're in Photoshop or you're in, you know, some other document in a PowerPoint presentation, you can define the color that you want to use as a hex number, right? And so I can go to, like, for my brand, for example, my primary color for our brand is 002663. Everywhere that I go, it's that color, right? And there's consistency across my brand because wherever that blue is shown, it's not blue, it's 002663. And there's other color codes that you can look at, but looking at brandcolors.net, looking at Coolors is great. For fonts, Google Fonts is a great site for you to access fonts that not only are free, but you have a license to use them. And so you have to be mindful of when you're picking up fonts, being sure that you have the right license to reuse those fonts, right? So I often tell clients of mine to look at a Google font pairing, right? Select a couple fonts that complement each other. And you have the ability with Google Fonts generally to utilize them across both your offline as well as your online platforms, right? So you can often use a Google font on your website, for example. A great website for creating assets that's also free is Canva. And just about everyone at this point knows of Canva, but canva.com is a great website to go to. You can bring in those colors that you're using. You can find many of those fonts that you would select if they're Google fonts. You can sometimes find them in Canva, or you can pay a little bit more for a paid version of Canva and import your fonts into that account. If you're a little bit more of a techie and you're comfortable using like an Adobe product, obviously the go-to tool for that would be Photoshop. So in terms of your brand development, asset creation, those are a couple websites and platforms that you can use. Probably one of the most important things that a couple weeks ago, we saw Facebook went down. for the day, right? I don't know if you guys caught on to that, but Instagram was down, WhatsApp was down, and I just was not functioning that day. And I realized the importance, even more so on that day, of making sure that you have your own website, right? Because there are a lot of people who run their businesses through Facebook, through Instagram, and a situation like that happens, you're toast, right? So don't just bank on social media as your go-to mode of marketing your platform. Begin to build an email list. If you've not yet done so, begin to do so today. There are platforms like MailChimp. I still use MailChimp today for free. 3 years into my podcast, they allow you to have a free account up to, I believe, 2,000 people on your list. And you can use a platform like MailChimp and get some really amazing things done. Just 2 weeks ago, Dave, I actually realized, I don't know if you guys use MailChimp, but MailChimp actually has this feature, allows you to do an RSS feed to an email. And one of the things that I am very consistent about publishing a podcast episode every Monday morning at 5 a.m. Eastern, right? For the last 3 years. But email is not my area of consistency, right? When it comes to getting those emails out. And
I'm right there with you.
Able to set up a RSS to email. Now, I always make sure that my website's up with the show notes on time for that 5 a.m. episode. And I was able to have MailChimp feed off of that and say at 7 a.m. on Monday morning, and this was the second Monday in a row now, I've been able to get an email out because it's reading that show notes page and creating an email based on it. And it's fantastic. So, and that's all for free, right? So begin to build an email list on your website, create a simple one-page what I call a transitional call to action, right? Create something like a checklist or a guide or something simple, one page that somebody can download that they're going to find value. Don't just tell them to sign up for your newsletter because they don't want yet another newsletter in their email inbox, right? So give them a reason to sign up and begin to look at ways that you can create, some connection with them through email marketing. And you can begin to feed off of that in terms of product and services downhill. But in terms of email marketing, a free platform for you is MailChimp. You want to spend some more? There are other great platforms, email platforms out there, ConvertKit, ActiveCampaign, or you could go down the rabbit hole on email platforms. But look at a platform like MailChimp if you don't have to spend. Another great tool that in 2019 we need is a social media scheduler, right? There are free platforms. Again, I love to kind of show you that this can be done for free 99, right? So you could look at a platform like Hootsuite if you don't have to spend, and you can upload, you can create a spreadsheet of posts that you want to go on social. I've actually stepped up to a platform that's called eClincher, a lot like another platform called MeetEdgar. Those are two platforms that are a little bit more expensive. They can run you $40-50 a month. But with eClincher for my podcast, I'm able to schedule hundreds of posts inside eClincher. And once I put them in there, I don't have to do anything. It's will recycle those posts for me. So right now, for example, as Dave shared, I have 160. I think today was the 163rd episode of the podcast that came out. And every week when I have a new episode come out, I will drop maybe 3, 4, 5 different posts inside eClincher in this group, in this category I have for guest posts. That bucket now has probably 400 posts, 500 posts in it. And I will schedule, say for easy numbers, I don't even know how many posts there are, but there are probably easily 7 to 10 posts a day scheduled for Twitter alone. And so through the course of a week, I could easily have 150, 200 posts that go out on Twitter. And people are always like, dude, how do you stay so active on Twitter? I'm not. eClincher is, right? I might be on the beach in Jamaica. eClincher is working for me, right? So a platform like that is worth the $40 or $50 a month to me because it keeps my content rotating, right? Even while I'm not able to be on social at that point in time. The last two platforms that I want to share with you and with your audience is really important, right? They're organization and task management tools. I live and die by Evernote, but maybe for you, it might be Google Docs, right? But I do everything through Evernote in terms of organization. For the last 3 years, I've had a notebook for the podcast. And within that notebook, I have several notebooks. One is strictly for episodes. And so I have 163 episodes listed in there, and I can go in. I could easily just search for a specific episode and everything's going to come up for me right there. I don't have to search all over the place trying to find a Word doc or trying to figure out where content is. The other great side about a platform like a Google Doc or Evernote is that you can sync that content. So you can jump from your phone to your laptop to your desktop. It's all right there for you. So, make sure that you have that organization in place. And then task management. I use Asana. I don't know if you guys work off of a task management tool, but there are platforms like Asana and Trello that are out there for you that are really awesome at helping you stay organized and on time in terms of your different projects and your different tasks, and making sure that you can achieve the goals that you have set out to achieve throughout the course of the week, month, year, right? And beyond.
Yeah, impressive list of, tools, resources, either, like you said, free 99, some of them are going to cost you a little bit. But Steve, when you start looking at branding and the work that goes on, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that you need to establish before you can expect results. And I think, Stephen, that's what you're hinting at here is, yes, there's colors, fonts, there's assets, but there's the website, there's the email, there's the constant influx of social media scheduling, there's organizational tasks, task management, and these all play into, one, scheduling things out, creating more time for yourself so that you can do some more one-on-one interactions with people, but let the technology work while you can do some other work. And Steve, I think that's one of the big takeaways that I'm gathering from what Steve's been saying here.
You touched on something here, Dave, that's really important, right? Your brand isn't just what you see. The brand is experience, right? A big part of this is, how people perceive your brand, right? As I touched on just a second ago, people look at me and say, Stephen, how do you stay so active in Twitter? And I'm not there, but the perception is that I'm very actively engaged in showcasing my brand and showcasing the podcast. And then that perception comes across as this professional podcaster and, this presence, and it serves the people who I'm trying to court to come onto the podcast because they're seeing how I would treat them as a guest.
I honestly hadn't thought about it that way. What about you, Steve? What are your kind of thoughts going on with everything Steven's throwing at us? It's amazing stuff.
I'm actually trying to soak it all in. I'm glad you're taking notes, Dave, because we're going to need to go back and reread these so we can implement some of this stuff. And number one, my business would not survive without Evernote.
Yes.
I don't care what Evernote costs me. I don't care if it's $100 a month. I'm paying it because it is my lifesaver. No matter what I'm doing, it's just a phenomenal product. It's interesting in today's environment that but before a lot of this tool architecture and technology, we had to do this from a total different perspective and methodology without the assistance of some of these tools. So it's certainly advantageous to pick up on these and get involved with them. And I guess I would also say, if you're listening here, don't take this necessarily just from a entrepreneurial business perspective, but also absorb some of this for a personal branding, personal deliverance of yourself. Whether you're trying to sell something or not is immaterial, but I think with a lot of this, we can also build our own personal representation of who we are, and I think that's very important. I want to jump into one thing here, guys, and that is, besides colors and logos and all this stuff, the written discipline about your brand is very important, but the point I want to get to is and get your input on slogans and taglines, because I think those have become very important in the sale, to be honest, with a lot of major branding, like I'm loving it, finger looking good, eat fresh, and those kinds of things. Stephen, do you think those are also important from not just the major brands, but from guys like me?
I'm less tied to having to have necessarily a tagline, but I love to have a one-liner, if you will, that is clear about what it is you do and who it is you serve, right? That again, is simple and it's repeatable, right? So, for example, at the beginning of this call, I shared with you, I serve entrepreneurs and leaders. I help them to develop an amazing brand that is authentic, it is impactful, and it is profitable. That's my repeatable line. I say that everywhere. You will jump on my website at stephenahart.com right now, and you could probably count 5 or 6 different places on the site that you see that phrase come up. I'm saying it over and over and over again. I'm telling you who I serve. I serve entrepreneurs and I serve leaders. If you don't self-identify as either, I probably don't serve you. And so you're going to check out. But if you check in, then you're like, hey, what's next? Right? Because I do want an amazing brand. I do want something that, is authentic, that does have impact, and that is going to make me money. Right? So what I think is really important about that when we're talking about the personal brand is sometimes we often think, especially as podcasters, we think of just our podcast. We don't look at the fact that we're building a media company. And over time, if your brand, and as your brand begins to grow, as you bring on other people, you want to make sure you have a consistent message that, again, doesn't confuse people, that the people you bring in behind you can relay that same message consistently, right, to whoever it is, because that's part of the culture now, right? So I think it's important in terms of, whether you use that as a tagline. Again, I'm not necessarily trying to put that as part of the logo, but I think it's really important when somebody lands on your website, when somebody lands on your social media, it's clear that one-liner pops up, in several places wherever your brand is shown, and you're articulating your message, whether it's visual or it's spoken, right? You're going to tell people that consistent message every single time.
I think that's very important that you brought up, Stephen, because I take your podcast, for example. You always say trailblazers.fm. That's in explore successful Black professionals. Like that is ingrained. That is something that no matter what episode somebody downloads, whatever they see on social media from you, yes, it may not be a tagline or a slogan. It's that repeatable phrase. And I think that's, you really hit the nail on the head when you said a repeatable phrase that can be easily used and shared and stated. Steve, you mentioned, finger licking good, all those other things. Those are, very similar in concept, but I guess twisted in a way or used in a way that is going to benefit you and your brand and what you're trying to accomplish as a business leader and a leader in your space.
Something we didn't touch on, Dave, and it ties in with technology, and it's really, really important, is a website. I didn't touch on this, but I lean to WordPress as a platform that I build my sites on. And whether you're using WordPress or you're using Squarespace or you're using some other platform, I think it's really important in 2019 and beyond that you make sure that your website has a responsive web design. I'm still looking at websites right now that I pull up and it does not respond well on mobile. And you and I are podcasters, majority of people listening to our platform, they're doing so via their phone, right? If your website's not responding well on a mobile phone, it's a problem. And people are going to probably come off and not consume the content you want them to. So just be mindful. There's, everything else we touched on before applies, but also make sure whatever web platform you're using, whether it's WordPress or whatever other platform, make sure you're installing a theme. Make sure you're using something that allows your website to respond to whatever device and whatever environment, whether that's a cell phone, a laptop, a desktop. Look at your website in different browser environments as well. Make sure it operates not only in Chrome, but it operates in Safari and Explorer and every other browser environment as well, right? So just be mindful of how your website might appear to different people in different areas.
It's a really good point. I know periodically Dave will text me.
Steve, I sure do.
Website's not working on mobile. What'd you do? Oh, well, thanks for checking. I'll go fix that. But you're right. Most everybody is dealing with their content via mobile, and it's just a very critical aspect. Stephen, I wanted to ask you about, I know part of the center point of what you do is with Black entrepreneurs, etc. Can you dive into a little bit of that, of the maybe some of the challenges and successes that you've had with Black clients?
More so around the podcast, right? So I interview successful Black professionals, be it entrepreneurs or corporate leaders, and some of the challenges, if you will, that I have seen come across as more of a theme especially for entrepreneurs, it'd be securing funding, right? Securing capital for their brand, for their business. And on the corporate side, not really having a seat at the table, not really being able to secure opportunities at the highest levels in the corporate sphere. And so as it relates to both, I think, having the right kind of branding is important. You really have to stand out from the crowd if you hope to really be able to secure what you're trying to achieve, whether that's funding or a seat in that corporate sphere, right? But consistently across the board over the last 3 years, those are two really unique challenges that I've seen. And I think, again, it comes back to being very clear. I can't state this enough. Being clear on who you're serving, understanding their need, right? In the corporate world, you have to understand who you're serving. It's the first thing we do in market research, right? Who is that buyer persona? Who's that avatar? Who is it that we are trying to help? What it is that they are needing, right? And how you can then craft your offer, your product, your service, your career to serve that need. That goes beyond color or race or ethnicity, right? Those are unique challenges that I think Black professionals face, but I still think getting crystal clear on who it is that you're serving helps you to be able to craft a solution to serve and really be able to stand out from the crowd, right? When you have that understanding, and then you can craft the right kind of message, you can craft the right type of offer, you can craft the right type of resume, you can craft the right type of consulting or coaching service, you can craft the right type of book or podcast, right? It doesn't matter what your offer is. When you understand a need, you can create a solution to solve that problem. You can create a solution to secure that seat where those executives at the top are looking at you because you get them. You understand what it is that they need. And I think all too often we step into this from the position of what can this company do for me? Or what can this customer do for me to help my bottom line? One of the things that I dislike most about people reaching out to me about being a guest on a podcast is saying, hey, I just wrote a book. What can you do for me? I cannot do anything for you, right? What can you do for my community, right? Is the question I ask. So always start from the position of what's in it for me, but the me is your client. The me is your employer, right? What can you do for them? How can you help them to solve a need? And I think once we get clear on that, it's off to the races. You're standing out from the crowd right then and there.
It always seems, Stephen, it's about service first, right? And yes, you want to serve yourself in the terms of having a good income, having a safe place to go to work, to come home to, provide for your family. Yes, that all makes sense, but service for your client and who your avatar, as you said, should be that one focus. I think too many times you've seen too many companies just take on clients for the sake of that revenue or increasing their capital, when they've sort of lost sight of, okay, when I created this business, as I branded myself, I was focused on service first and foremost. And do you feel like sometimes that gets outshadowed by the drive for power or prestige or income? It always seems like service is one thing that you've always really hinted at when you've talked about, repeatedly in your podcast and on other shows.
Man, I think at the end of the day, we focus too much on ourselves and what we want, and we don't focus on what, and the people who stand out in the podcast, the people who come on to this show and stand out from the crowd are the people who get it. They understand that I need to serve, right? I need to provide an experience. It's interesting. When that light bulb moment went off for me as a podcaster, it was powerful because it took me a while to start to survey the audience. Initially, I thought I was out here serving a much younger demographic. I started polling the audience every year, and then I started to retune who it was I was speaking to, right? Trailblazers primarily serves Black women aged 30 to 55, highly educated, high income earners, right? And when I began to process like, hey, I'm serving other trailblazers who just aren't able to access this content in their own environment, right? And I was able to begin to tune who it was that I was bringing onto the show, what kind of content, I was bringing forward for them to consume to solve the problems that they were experiencing. I get on the phone on a regular basis, Dave, with people when they raise their hand and they say, hey, I've been listening to your podcast for so long. I say, hey, can we jump on a call? Can I talk to you for a bit? One of my diehard fans who has now become a big pillar in the podcast, has done every show notes page for me for free for the last year and a half, is somebody that was in Canada consuming my content for a long time, reached out on Twitter one day. And I said, hey, can we jump, can we connect? And now this is one of the probably Blazer Nation #1, right? And fits the demographic of who our audience is. And so listen, when you get crystal clear on who it is you're serving and what you're serving them, understand what the need is. Believe me, your business, your platform, your podcast, whatever it is that you're building, your career is going to take off.
Yeah, it's an impressive story. And the thing that I'm also gathering, just absorbing this conversation, is you've talked about experience. It's what people experience. It's
Absolutely.
Providing an experience. It's not just, okay, here's the tagline, here's the phrase, here's the colors. It's about that experience. What does somebody feel when they interact with you, when they interact, whether it's reading your book, your blog, your podcast, your social media post, whatever it is. And I'm curious, Stephen, when people experience something like that, say, if you have any experiences, whether in your corporate job or with your podcast or academy, is when they have a positive experience, say with a podcast, does that translate into something else for you to build off on? Say, are they joining an academy, or are you creating a different relationship out of that? I mean, is there like
Absolutely.
like a waterfall effect?
Oh, absolutely. Without question. So Trailblazers is my pillar, right? It's my foundation. And one of the things that we didn't touch on in terms of brand elements is voice, right? As podcasters, your voice is a big part of your brand. There are a lot of people who are Caribbean, who are second generation Caribbean, that grew up in a house with Caribbean parents, and they hear my Jamaican accent and they feel right at home. Now imagine if I tried to suppress that, right? And not own that in my show. I would have had a disconnect with people, but there are several people who embrace that. They love that, right? There are other people out there that may have the very same content that I'm putting out on Trailblazers, but somebody likes to hear my spin on it because they can relate to my voice, right? To my experiences in a way that no one else can create that connection with that listener, or that user, or that customer. So you have to embrace everything, right? The mood, the voice, those all come into the inputs, right? In addition to the color and the fonts and the logo and all that stuff. And it spins off. To your point, there are many people who have become diehard consumers of the podcast content. And when I launched Brand New Academy, there are several people who came into Brand New's beta as a result of that, of the connection that I had built. Understand, again, with a podcast especially, you're building that know, like, and trust. People who have listened to you and Steve for however long you guys have been doing this podcast, they know, like, and trust you, right? And so when you are able to articulate that you're creating something with them in mind, right? They already have that established trust. They already have bought into the experience they get with you, working with you, listening to you, consuming your content. And if you are providing a product or service that fits a need that they have, it's automatic. They're not thinking. It's not a second guess for them, right? All day long, we have all this information coming at us, right? In this world of quote unquote fake news. And we're trying to process what to, repel and what to receive in. When you have built that relationship and that know, like, and trust factor for your brand, whatever you are telling someone, if it fills that need and they know, like, and trust you, it is so easy to get that person to convert into being a client, to convert into being an advocate after being a client and sharing your platform with other people. And that's what I've seen with Brand You. There are people who have done the course that are now signing up to be affiliates of the program, that are now, advocates for the brand of the course, right? And it absolutely spills over into other things that you do. In fact, yesterday I got an email so crazy story. I have a past guest of the podcast who came into Brand You, who is now signing up to be an affiliate, who speaks quite often, pretty much every week, speaks several times a week. And I got an email yesterday from a website saying, hey, that person spoke highly of you. I would like you to speak at an event later this year outside of the country. So I have an international speaking opportunity that came off of that, right?
That's
so
awesome.
it speaks to exactly what you'd asked.
There's nothing better than having rewards from your own words. And what you're teaching and showing is proof of the pudding that these kinds of things work. So my question to you, Stephen, would be somebody that, let's say, owns a company, and of course they have that mindset of, I don't need help. We're doing fine, da-da-da-da-da. What questions should they perhaps ask themselves to render whether they need professional assistance or not with this?
I would say the bigger thing, coming back to the foundation of that, Steve, is, are you crystal clear on your communication framework, right? I think it's so important, right? Are you certain that the message that you have is clear to your target audience, to the people you're trying to serve? Are you clear on who you're trying to serve? Are you clear on your messaging being simple, relevant, repeatable? Those are important pieces. If you don't understand who your audience is and you're not clear, if you're still thinking that you're serving everyone, you need help. If your message, if I open your website right now and your about page is like 5, 6, 7 paragraphs of copy, we need help, because no one is reading your about page, right? We need to be able to get real succinct on that and get clear on what your message needs to be, to be able to connect with the people you're trying to serve. And beyond that, again, the people sometimes think that colors and fonts and all that side of things are fluff. But again, I come back to it, people are going to make a decision of whether or not they choose to work with you. Generally, within a minute and a half, within 90 seconds, somebody's going to make a judgment about your brand based on the color alone. So, if you don't think, if you had never really given thought to it, or if you have questions about elements that you're using right now, it may be to your benefit to have that consultation, because if you're repelling people you're trying to serve, right, just based on those elements, what and how much money are you losing, right? It may just be worth having that conversation with someone about, whether or not you're using the right elements. And sometimes, most of the times, if you have an established brand, just having, a refresh on some of that can take you a long way, right? And it doesn't need to be very expensive or time consuming, but having somebody step in and help guide you through, or help confirm for you that you're going in the right direction. We all need help. I'm a brand strategist, and I look for ways every year to get out to events, to step into webinars, to consume courses myself, to continue to improve. So if I need it on a frequent basis, I think everyone should make a consistent effort to always be improving their brand, especially in 2019 and beyond, because digital is where your marketing channels through first.
Impressive stuff, Stephen. I think, wrapping up this conversation here is the 3 takeaways that I'm getting from everything that you said, and I could take away 50 or 100 based on what we talked about, is service, experience, and clarity. And I feel like you can incorporate all the brand elements we talked about, but if you can be crystal clear as far as the audience you're trying to reach, or that you want to reach, having a service first mindset, and then creating a really positive experience for whoever's coming over to your brand, or to your, reading your book, listening to your podcast, or coming to your consulting webinars, whatever it is. To me, service, experience, and clarity are some of the major things that we need to be taken away from this conversation and trying to implement from day one.
Absolutely.
Well, Steve, do you? What about you? Any final thoughts, takeaways from this whole conversation? I know this is something that you and I definitely aren't experts in. Therefore, we brought Stephen in. But in 2019 and moving forward, optimizing for mobile, and then having a defined avatar, and working on all those brand elements, all critical to the success of your corporation, but also yourself as an individual.
I think one of the important things to certainly take away is that because of today's digital universe, if you want to separate the chaff and the wheat, then you need to be involved with a lot of the tactics and information that Stephen has presented. With so many online availability of getting things done or sales or whatever the case may be, you need to stand apart. You need to be rememberable. As he mentioned, you need to have that concise phraseology. And it's not something that you just do once and you're good for the rest of your life or career or whatever the case may be. It's a continual evolution of dedication to the proper presentation of what you are and what you do. And I think those are the important things, at least from my perspective, that we take away from the discussion tonight.
Well, Stephen, let's have some final thoughts from you, man. I can't thank you enough for joining us and sharing your knowledge with our listener base. Thank you so much. Any final words, and then let us know where we can find you. Where's the best place to connect with you and check out your website?
Dave and Steve, thank you so very much for having me. Humbled to be here and to be able to serve your audience. I'll piggyback on what Steve said because it's something to harp on quite a bit. And I'll just say this to your community. Someone is Googling you. Someone is Googling you. And the results that they find are going to leave them more or less inclined to do business with you or to hire you, right? You have to take care of your personal brand and your digital footprint. If you need help, I invite you to reach out to me. Very easy to connect with me. My email is Stephen@StephenAHart.com. Stephen is with a PH, so STEPHEN. I am at Stephen A. Hart everywhere on social. And my website is StephenAHart.com. So you can
it's as if you've thought that through.
So StephenAHart.com, at Stephen A. Hart. Reach out to me. You can access the podcast through my website. You can access information about the Academy and sign up to be on a wait list for our next class, which is opening in April. So get on right now if you have an interest in becoming part of our next cohort. And reach out to me if you have any other questions. I'd love to help.
Yeah, and everything Stephen mentioned, including all those websites, we'll have at our show notes over at thewavesoftech.com. Make sure you guys utilize those resources when it comes to whether building your website, using a social media scheduler, task management, assets, using Adobe, fonts, colors, and more importantly, your voice, about honing your voice, owning your voice, and utilizing your voice within your own branding. So guys, thank you so much for joining us, episode 438. To find recent episodes of the podcast and connect with us on social media, head over to thewavesoftech.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to keep on teching.